Welcome classic rock fans to one of my topic videos, and today we're looking at Led Zeppelin versus Deep Purple. As always, if you're new to my channel, I do urge you to click like, subscribe and check that bell. And do check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the work done here at Classic Album Review. It's always much appreciated. So if I had to choose between one of those bands, which one would it be? It's a tough old choice, and I must admit the shelves behind me positively groan with the accumulative weight of both these bands' discographies. I do realise asking you to choose between these two classic bands, of course, is a bit like asking you which foot do you want removing. But that is exactly what I am asking you to do. I mean, you can play along or not, it's entirely up to you. You can imagine that quite well furrowed scenario of that desert island with the somehow magical electricity supply and a turntable. And you could have the discography of either one of these bands, but not both. Which one would it be? I suppose if you had to think about the key ingredients that somehow define these bands' music. I mean, whether it's that neoclassical throb of Hammond, which is very much infuses the classic Purple sound, or the wonderful arrangements of John Paul Jones. Perhaps it's the operatic wails of Ian Gillan versus the priapic strut of Robert Plant. Or maybe it's the fiery baroque stylings of Ritchie Blackmore compared to the technical and melodic solos of Jimmy Page. Of course, Page branches off into a lot of folk and Eastern-influenced acoustic pieces. Mind you, in the words of Marcellus Wallace, even Ritchie Blackmore recently has gone all medieval on us as well. I suppose it all comes down to what tickles your fancy at the end of the day, whether it's the Purple as that perfect hybrid of pop, rock and classical pretensions, or the barbaric yop of Led Zeppelin, drawn primarily from the paradigms of the blues, at least initially anyway. Growing up, I'd often hear these bands mentioned in the same breath, as if they were one and the same thing. I remember being exposed to the Made in Japan album when I was about 13, and when I finally managed to acquire my own copy, I played the grooves off it. Likewise, I was absolutely mesmerised by The Song Remains the Same, especially those wonderful camera effects during Stairway to Heaven. But there are other great bands, of course, that were overshadowed by the popularity, fame and reputation of Purple and Led Zeppelin. Bands like, Budgie, Nazareth and Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep are a wonderful, wonderful band. I love those early albums. Check out my classic album review on Look At Yourself. But Led Zeppelin are a band that certainly have their detractors, as Lester Bangs famously referring to them as emaciated fops. They're a band that metamorphosised from the New Yardbirds into the hernia-inducing Led Zeppelin in the late 60s. And their debut album is a real statement of intent from the get-go. I must admit I'll probably ruffle a few feathers here, but I'm not a huge fan of that British blues boom, that British blues explosion, if you want to call it that. It's not that I don't marvel at the wonderful technical wizardry, the nuanced playing and the musicianship. It's just wonderful. I went to see Alvin Lee in concert a while ago, and it's just I thought it was absolutely staggering the way he played. And I love early Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, especially a little bit later on from the first albums, when they start becoming dark, employing more psychedelic textures and atmospherics, brooding numbers like the Green Man Alishi, Man of the World, and the wonderful instrumental Albatross. The problem I have with that British blues boom is it seems a little bit inauthentic, a bit of a facsimile. I have the same problem with Britpop in many respects. But I think it was Graham Edge of the Moody Blues that said, we were singing about cotton fields, none of us had ever seen one. But that first Led Zeppelin album was a huge, weighty, punishing slab of vinyl. There's no doubt about that. So we think about the differences between these bands. As I've already said, Led Zeppelin draw initially from the paradigms of the blues. Whereas Deep Purple, for those first three albums, I think they're just trying to be vanilla fudge. Until we get the ritualised sackings, of course, which is pretty much a motif that mars Deep Purple's career, and we get this amalgam of Deep Purple as was with episode 6. And the music reflects a very much British rock and pop sensibility, with numbers like the frenetic Speed King and the intense melodrama and, dare I say, progginess of a track like Child in Time. Led Zeppelin 2 is gorgeously heavy, but I must admit I love it when they go all Tolkien on us. We start getting vibes from the incredible string band starts to infuse their music. And I do firmly believe that Led Zeppelin 4 is deserving of a spot at the top of anyone's top 10 albums of all time. I think in terms of Purple, Made in Japan is a a blueprint for how all live albums should be. After a brief dalliance with more funkier textures on the Fireball album, an album that Blackmore insists that the band dropped a collective bollock with that one. Then we get the incredible Machine Head album. I mean, what a record that is. That classic Mark II lineup, that holy trinity of heaviness, those three albums. But by the mid-70s, Led Zeppelin released Physical Graffiti, a double album that has to be one of the best double albums of all time. From the lascivious strut of Custard Pie to the thunderous pulse that is Kashmir. I read somewhere that Ritchie Blackmore once said to John Bonham, "Hey, at least Deep Purple don't copy everything." I suppose that purloined Ricky Nelson riff had just temporarily slipped his mind. I think Deep Purple are just as important as Led Zeppelin, but they do not get the recognition they deserve. Lars Ulrich said Purple displayed a technical efficiency that was unparalleled at the time, but as I said, Deep Purple did not receive the same accolade as Led Zeppelin, so I thought about the reasons why that might be. So if you'll forgive me for referring to my notes, it's become a bit of a catchphrase for me now. First off, Led Zeppelin's lineup never changed. I think this is a biggie. Even today, Robert Plant is reluctant really to form or play as Led Zeppelin without John Bonham. But for Deep Purple, the lineup was constantly changing, which led to many inconsistencies in terms of the music and the sound. Fractious relations which did at times affect the music, especially in the 70s, with Blackmore falling out with almost everybody really, and disbanding the most successful lineup ever, sacking Roger Glover. Gillan leaves before recruiting Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale and taking them a different direction sonically. Often wonder what would have been had that lineup stayed together. You get bands that gravitate or rotate around a central figure. In the case of Jethro Tull, for example, Ian Anderson is the singer, frontman and writer of this material, and the rest of the band is like a carousel, really, but Ian Anderson is the one constant. But with Deep Purple, it didn't quite work. I mean, they were constantly changing the personnel as singers. They did try to build the band around, I think, Ritchie Blackmore, but it was like building on quicksand, really. The second factor is management. Led Zeppelin had Peter Grant, who was an immense figure, whereas Deep Purple were plagued by bad management. Grant didn't just understand the market, the music industry. He made sure that the band got their fair share of the majority of the earnings of the money made from their music. Thirdly, I think Led Zeppelin were able to establish themselves more permanently, I think, in the USA. Purple had a lot of success there, but I don't think it was sustained. I mean, the California Jam thing they did was popular. I think there was about 200,000 people there. But they did share the bill with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who went on after Deep Purple, I believe, and the Eagles and Rare Bird and other acts on the bill as well. And the fourth, it was just hard to keep up with the direction that Deep Purple were pursuing. The lineup changes, as I've already touched upon, were constantly shifting, which I think alienates a lot of fans. You get a lot that will just leave and come back or not come back at all. If I may quote Classic Rock magazine, Deep Purple may have been better musicians than Led Zeppelin, but in the world of rock and roll, that isn't always enough. As I said, Zeppelin functioned as one unit, whether it was making decisions live, and they had the full support, of course, of their management. Whereas Deep Purple were constantly fracturing, which I think affected their overall success. So in all honesty, I think my preference would have to be for Deep Purple. I think when things were right, they were just formidable, the musicianship, sound, volume. But their success was built on some pretty dodgy fault lines, I think. I mean, In Rock it was arguably one of the best hard rock heavy metal albums out there. It's hugely influential. And for an album recorded in 1969, it's punishingly heavy. And I prefer Blackmore's playing on a good day when he can be asked. And I love that classical element that John Lord brings, that Hammond sound that just emanates from those early Deep Purple albums. I love both of these bands, but if I was going to choose, I'd probably go with Deep Purple. So I'm going to round it all up by saying thank you for taking part in this little exercise, and hope you're all staying safe, staying warm, but more importantly that you keep listening.